The EU and UK have reached an agreement to reset post-Brexit relations during a summit in London. A key element will see restrictions lifted on the movement of plant and animal products between the EU and UK. Officials say this should significantly reduce checks and controls on food products entering Northern Ireland from Great Britain.
It's been a relationship that has been strained in recent years. Today, however, the EU and UK put on a united front as they hosted their first summit since Brexit, reaching an agreement to improve cooperation across a number of areas, marking a reset in relations.
This is the story of historical and natural partners standing side by side on the global stage.
This is the first UK-EU summit. It marks a new era in our relationship.
Among the measures agreed today, UK alignment with EU plant and animal standards to eliminate checks, a formal defence pact paving the way for the UK to access a proposed €150 billion EU defence fund. The UK will extend fishing rights for EU boats for another 12 years. A youth experience scheme has been agreed in principle to allow young people in the EU and UK to live and work in both areas. And British holidaymakers are to be allowed to use more passport e-gates at European airports. The elimination of checks on plant and animal products will be of particular benefit to people in Northern Ireland. In relation to these SPS changes, when will those changes take effect?
Today is an agreement in principle, it's a common understanding. Then we will have to negotiate a legal text with the EU, which will take some time. And then we will have to pass legislation behind me here in Westminster.
Anytime there's close cooperation between the UK and the EU, both benefit, but Ireland, particularly within the EU, benefits as well.
This afternoon, leaders attended a lunch on board a military ship on the River Thames to emphasise the defence element of today's agreement, a deal both sides described as marking a new era in EU-UK relations.
Well, Tommy joins us now from Downing Street. We're also joined by our Europe editor, Tony Connolly, who's in Brussels. Tommy, Keir Starmer talking this deal up, but opponents say it sells out the fishing industry and it leaves Britain as a rule taker.
The reaction, David, has been in many ways as you would expect. Those that are in favour of Brexit have criticised this deal today, and those that never wanted the UK to leave the European Union have welcomed the fact that this summit has happened. As you referenced there, the Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch held a press conference earlier today, and she said that the UK had decided to become rule takers rather than rule makers. She said that in terms of freedom of movement, this amounted to a backsliding in that area, and she also said that fishermen had been sold out. Nigel Farage, the leader of Reform UK, which is currently rising in opinion polls, made a similar argument that the fishing sector had been sold out. The job of selling this UK-EU recess is well underway. Labour leader Keir Starmer is currently meeting with his Labour MPs. He has obviously made the calculation, David, that if he can prove somewhat over the coming months and years that by moving closer to the European Union he has helped to improve the country economically, that there is going to be an increase in exports, well then he feels that he can win that argument overall. Many will welcome the fact as well that the European Union and the United Kingdom are working closer in the area of defence and security. But another important point, I think, is just the symbolism around today's event. It's almost 10 years since that Brexit referendum. This was the first event where you see the UK and the EU trying to portray themselves as global partners.
OK, and Tony, Brussels did play hardball on this, insisting on an extension of fishing access in return for that deal on plant and animal products.
That's right, David. The Brexit trade agreement 5 years ago essentially continued European access to UK waters until the middle of next year, when there would be a review, and obviously British fishing the industry at that time hoped to take full control of British waters. And obviously once there was this negotiation for a reset, European member states, particularly France, would want fisheries to be part of that bargaining process. Now, initially, the UK said that the transitional arrangements that we have at the moment could be rolled over for another 10 years, but France, supported by Ireland, Belgium and the Netherlands and a number of other countries, felt that at the end of that 10-year period, the EU wouldn't have any leverage to get as good a deal on fisheries. So they wanted to link the fishing aspect to the SPS agreement. In other words, the duration of the SPS agreement would be tied to the duration of the fisheries agreement. The UK came back and said, we'll give you 12 years of a rollover, and the EU thought that would be okay, and that there would be other factors at play in 2038 that they could use as leverage. There was pressure from the German Chancellor on this topic, and he was really keen to get a deal done because he's very interested in security and defence. The Irish government believes that this 12-year rollover will give the industry stability and security. The Irish fishing the fish producers organisation say absolutely not. 40% of the European quotas that will go to the UK come from Irish fishing vessels, and they say that fact has simply not been addressed in this deal.
OK, we'll have more on this later, but for now, Tony Connolly and Tommy Mescal, thank you for that. Returning to that new deal between Britain and the EU, we're joined from Downing Street by Alva Ray, Associate Editor with Bloomberg News. Good evening, Alva. Thanks very much for joining us on 6-1. If you were to listen to Keir Starmer, this is a win-win which will turn the page. If you were to listen to Tory leader Kemi Badenoch, it's a surrender which takes Britain backwards. I suppose it's not quite as dramatic in reality as either of them are trying to pretend.
Well, exactly. It's probably somewhere in the middle of that. This is something that Keir Starmer has been looking for quite a long time. He was promising this well before the election. He said that he would seek to reset the UK's relationship with the EU, but he has had to pay a bit of a price for it. So you mentioned that there is going to be improved, easier trade between the UK and the EU. That will also ease up trade between NI and GB, but they've made concession on fishing and youth mobility. So you're hearing people like Kemi Badenoch call this a bit of a surrender. It's somewhere in between the two.
The fishing industry seem to be really, really aggrieved about this. They feel they've been sold out again. But I suppose if you put the damage to the fishing industry against the potential gain in other areas, the government probably thought it was going for the greater good.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a couple of things to say on that. I think it is absolutely fair to say that we were not expecting the 12 years on fishing. Even this time yesterday, the UK were not giving in on this point. So it is completely fair to say that this was a last-minute move by the UK, agreeing to this 12-year thing in order to get the rest of the deal done. And in that sense, you can tell that this wasn't something that the UK really, really wanted to be doing. But it's also the case that they've got this big SPS deal in return, so removing a lot of the checks on goods going between the UK and the EU, and ironically that actually includes fish. So while some fishermen are definitely very unhappy about this deal, the people who want to have UK waters just to themselves, it's also the case that for those that export to the EU, this is good. And then more broadly, the government's saying this is actually good for jobs across the economy. They're estimating that by 2040 it should bring about 9 billion to the UK economy every year. They see this as a deal worth making, but it's a little bit of a gamble because the Brexit debates were so divisive. Already certain right-wing newspapers, the Conservatives, Reform, are all lining up to call this a surrender, capitulation. So it'll be interesting to see how the politics land on this and whether the public are actually okay with these improved trade conditions with these trade-offs.
Now, you mentioned the politics, and it is really interesting because, as you say, a lot of the old arguments are being rehashed in some areas of the media. But, I mean, this is a deal which smooths some of the rough edges, but it goes nowhere near bringing Britain back into the common market or the customs union, the single market or the customs union. And there is no conceivable government in Britain that would do that. Is that right?
Well, exactly. I mean, so for a long time, Keir Starmer said that he wanted to improve the relations between the EU and the UK to get the economy moving. But he actually left himself quite a narrow landing zone because, as you say, it's just seen by the Labour Party as completely not politically palatable to make the case for returning to the customs union or the single market. And then there's also on youth mobility a bit of controversy. So actually, even though this is symbolically huge and the government is talking up the gains, this will actually be quite limited in its scope in a sense, and in some parts of the agreement is actually just an agreement to negotiate further and to keep talks going. It's the beginning rather than the end of the process.
OK, Alva Ray of Bloomberg News from a very busy Downing Street. Thank you very much for joining us.